Hey Kev, let's follow this trail over here. This looks like there might be something waiting down there.
All right. Hey, wait a minute. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I thought it was just me. What the heck is that?
I don't know what that is. Whoa, do you smell that too?
That's unbelievable. Hey, look.
What the?
Hey, look, those branches are moving over there.
What the heck is that?
Holy cow, is that what I think it is? Look at that thing.
Oh my God.
It's a freaking Sasquatch. Welcome to the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters podcast. I am your host, W.J. Sheehan. Hello, everybody, and once again, may I welcome you to this, our fine podcast. My name is W.J. Sheehan, author of the series of books Bigfoot, Terror in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters. 9 volumes available in paperback and ebook format at Amazon. And, in case you haven't been listening, Volume 9. So there are 9 volumes now on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon as well. So please go out, show a sign of support, and buy a copy or 2 or 3. And now, may I introduce you to my brother and co-host, KJ Sheehan. Kev, how are you today?
I figured if the new recording gets like a little trumpet, maybe I get one. I'm doing all right. It's another stormy, rainy night outside, so if you hear a little noise in the background, hopefully it's not a dog man outside my window. I think it's the rain and the wind. Or if I suddenly disappear, that's because I see some big red eyes looking in at me.
Run for your lives.
Woohoo! How's that drum go from like Scooby-Doo? There'll be an outline of me going through the front door.
Yeah, the legs should...
as I'm looking out the back door here.
Yeah, the cutout going through the door, perfect.
Exactly.
I had something funny happen today. It's nothing crazy. I'm out on the deck and I hear this rustling in one of these big hedges next to the desk. I turned my head in response to the rustling, and this big hawk was in the bushes next to me.
Oh.
And he just, it shows you how those little buggers, they hide.
Oh, okay. Did he have a critter? Or
no, but,
not yet.
They clip a bird here and there by my feeders. Yeah. And I've seen lots of different hawks, jumping around in the bushes, even on the ground. And they're sneaky. They come in, They kind of make their way in, and they're looking around. They're waiting for somebody to come out of cover so they could jump on them,
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I didn't mention it to you, but I was on a little hike here in North Carolina, just locally, last Sunday. And it was kind of a dark and gray day. And I'm hiking along, and I hear this rustling next to me in the woods. And it was a big buck deer. But, his camouflage was so good, even without the leaves on the trees and stuff like that. I could hear him like he was, 10 feet away from me. He was about 75 feet away from me, but he was rustling along. But then when he would stop moving, I couldn't see him. And I was like, oh, I see you.
Yeah.
But he was like walking along next to me.
Yeah, the camouflage, even with the Bigfoot, how many people have said they thought they were looking at a stump?
No, well, that's why I mentioned it, because he is a deer, right? Like, we see deer constantly here. Mm-hmm. But when he was in the full woods and he has, like, a little bit of the darker, thicker coat, this time of the year, when he stood still, I couldn't see him.
That's right.
Even though I heard him. So you can imagine what the camouflage that the hairy man has.
Yeah, well, if we've heard it once, we've heard it dozens of times. That I thought it was this, I thought it was that, or I didn't see it.
Yeah.
So, when you talk about having an encounter with hairy man, you may have walked by one and not even known it.
Yes.
So, and I've said in the past that a lot of these creatures, I think, lay down.
Yeah, we've covered that in some of your accounts, Bill, where you're looking for something vertical, but it's actually horizontal down at the ground.
And if this thing is laying behind, say, a felled tree, and just like from the eyeballs up appearing over a log, yeah, how are you going to notice that? You wouldn't even pick it up as not being part of the tree, like where a limb broke off or something, you know?
Yeah, I'm sitting here in my little recording area, and I'm thinking, because I'm looking around and I see all these hairy men that I have here, and they're all standing vertical. I'm going to have to knock a couple down horizontally.
Got some nerve standing vertical.
I know, like you guys get more realistic, will you? I need a couple of you on your side.
Or get up in the tree.
Yeah,
Let them be up on the ceiling coming down.
I don't have any trees in here. As you know, I do have some aircraft flying overhead.
Yeah, let one pilot one of those fighter planes.
There you go. Now you're talking. I do have this little hairy man that I got for Christmas. He's about 1.5 inches tall, but about 1 inch wide in true hairy man fashion. I could probably fit him. I'd have to cut the sides of the fuselage away to fit his shoulders. But he's about the right scale for like a 1/32 scale fighter.
Uh-huh. I'll put him in there with a pair of goggles and a scarf on.
Maybe we'll wrap an F4U Corsair around him. Could you imagine, like, flying along going after a Japanese Zero, and pilot of Zero looks over and sees a hairy man flying? Whoa, I'm out of here.
It's too much, man. Well, so what do we have, brother, in our Cryptids in the News and Other Oddities segment for today's podcast?
Yes. We are going back in time today.
All right.
One of my favorites. So this is a report coming out of the newspapers in Maine. And I may have touched on this from a different slant in the past, but I came across this again, and I'm not sure. But it's a written account of what was called a 10-foot-tall WildMan that was killed in 1886.
Coming out of Maine. Wow. And the WildMan is terminology that has been used for a long time.
Yeah, well, that's some of the original terminology, right, as I recall. Because, I went back as part of this, Bill, because we talk about it all the time. We reference it now at this stage in our 5th season that, like, we'll talking about an account and we'll say, like, well, that was before there was the term Bigfoot.
Right.
So I just took a minute and went back. Mm-hmm. And, the term Bigfoot really comes about in around 1958. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where a journalist in the Humboldt Times up in Northern California, pretty cool little town there in Humboldt, he had heard about some loggers in the same area in Northern California that had discovered some mysteriously large footprints. Mm-hmm. And he wrote back then in 1958, maybe we have a relative of the abominable snowman here. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Well, that's all we knew about. Yeah. It was the only thing that had been spoken about. The abominable.
Yeah. So they started to talk about it as Bigfoot there in Northern California, and there you go.
Just stuck.
That's just stuck.
Yeah, interesting.
But this WildMan, the story, and this comes out of the Bangor Daily News, and I'll talk about some of the other periodicals that it appeared in. It was reported as being 10 feet tall and had arms that were 7 feet long and hair growing all over its face and body.
That is one big boy.
Yeah, and they say the article first came out in a paper that was called the Waterville Sentinel. That was a weekly paper, and that's no longer around. And then 18 years later, they had a paper replace it called the Waterville Morning Sentinel.
Okay.
That was established in 1904. Okay. So that's where the article first came about.
That's an old article, boy.
I know, 1886, man.
Yeah, that's a long time ago, man.
And the story goes like this, okay? So it was in October 1886 when it was published. And it starts that an affrighted Frenchman from over the line arrived in Elm City to weave a frightening tale of woe. And it says, according to the excerpt from the Sentinel, that newspaper way back then, the Frenchman's story, which is implicitly believed, is that 3 men were camping out in the woods about 100 miles north of Moosehead Lake in Maine. And I looked up Moosehead Lake. It's in the northern central part of Maine. And it says that 2 of the campers were away from the camp for about a week and came back to find the dead body of their companion. Yeah, by the way, when they talked about him as being the Frenchman, as being from above the line or over the line, that's what they figure that he was from Canada.
Okay.
Probably from Quebec, right?
Yeah.
Over the line, And he told the story, and basically they came back and his friend was dead, and they believe that it was this giant WildMan. So they formed a posse back in town, right, to go back and hunt for this. So they went back with dozens of others searching, and they came across this thing that was, it says in quotes, it proved to be a terrible WildMan, 10 feet tall with arms 7 feet in length, covered in long brown hair. The posse party fired several shots at him and finally succeeded in reaching a fatal spot, laying the monster low.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm surprised the other 2 guys left this guy.
Well, he was armed, I'm sure. You know what I mean? Like, he's keeping an eye on the camp, and they're going out checking the fur traps or something, right? Whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to believe, right? I mean, you wouldn't do it if you knew there was a 10-foot hairy man roaming around killing people.
Well, I guess, I'm just trying to put the pieces together as to when it was first seen. I don't think they would have left him there knowing this thing was there, but yet...
No, I don't think so. But they're not clear on the exact timeline of when it was ever seen.
Right. Because it seems like they came back, found the guy dead, and took the presumptive leap that this thing had killed it. So
I have a feeling they saw it at some point, probably maybe leaving the camp or so, but they didn't talk about it.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah.
So what happened after they took this thing down?
Well, so that's the story shows up all over New England, right? Shows up in the St. Albans Daily Messenger of Vermont. That this 10-foot wild man was killed in Maine. Another Maine newspaper says, a Maine newspaper of repute says that one 10-foot high was recently killed 100 miles north of Moosehead Lake.
Wow.
He had previously killed one of 3 hunters, and the other 2 got reinforcements and came back and slew the giant.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's all different stories that come about of it, but they say that in the papers back then, they would never really have a photograph and rarely even have some kind of a sketch. So nothing actually shows up.
Yeah, and again, folks, Kevin and I have spoken about this many times. There was no National Enquirer back then or anything bogus or hoaxy. I can't.
No, it was hard to get an article in the newspaper, right?
Limited space available.
Only one newspaper in most of these areas, all done by hand, right? Early printing presses, everything manual.
Yeah, what would it have been, a sheet or 2 maybe?
Yeah, even here in this article, they talk about it as the broadsheets, right? Mm-hmm. Big paper, kind of like, the New York Times is today, or actually it's kind of, I can't even say that anymore because all the papers have shrunk down in size over the past few years.
Yeah, but I know what you're talking about. You used to unfold the pages on that thing.
It'd be folded in 4 sections, each half.
Right, just to read what you were looking at.
exactly. I remember sitting on the train back in the old days up in your neck of the woods now, Bill, where you get on the train and you had to like open up the page and then fold the paper like 7 times so that you could hold it in front of you without elbowing your neighbor.
Now, what do you mean my neck of the woods? Are you talking about Moosehead Lake?
No, your neck of the woods is Long Island.
Oh, I thought...
When it was on the Long Island Railroad, you know.
Yeah.
Next stop, Jamaica.
I thought you...
Change at Jamaica for Penn Station.
Ronkonkoma.
Yeah. Last stop, Ronkonkoma. If you don't get off here, you're going to the rail yard.
Yeah. Boy, oh boy.
And so this was 1886 with this WildMan. And then, you know, the article talks about the fact that Bigfoot sightings in Maine, documented Bigfoot sightings in Maine, date back to the mid-1850s. And up there, they talk about it as an Indian devil that the local Native Americans called Pomula.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, this, in Indian lore, folklore, there have been accounts of these things or handed down history of these things hundreds of years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And they were always known as the hairy man or then given another name to it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's pretty obvious that in those days and times that not many of these tribes were sharing with each other. They had their own name for what they were experiencing.
Yep.
It wasn't like today we call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. You know, everybody kind of, I say everybody, but a lot of people know that terminology, you know.
Yeah, they know the wild man, right? That was even before the hairy man.
Right.
It's like these wild men.
And people were warned about it.
Oh, yeah.
When you talk to people about this who have older relatives, they were warned about these wild men, that they were no good.
Yeah.
And you didn't want to fool with them. So people who want to believe that, you know, this is Harry and the Hendersons you're running into out there, I'm sorry, man. I'm not in that camp.
No, I mean, you know, I don't know why this is coming to me, Bill, how our crazy brains work, both of us. But, you know, we talk about the old R gang. Do you remember where they came across the wild man?
Yeah, remember that guy? Oogly boogly, yeah.
And he's like, yum, yum, eat him up. Yum, yum, eat him up.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great.
I don't even remember, like, where the heck did they come across this guy? It wasn't like he was in New York City or something.
No, remember they came into a room full of jewels? Was that the one where they came into? It was like some weird episode where they came across some room full of jewels and this guy jumped out.
It's like they were inside of a pyramid.
That's something. I don't know what it was. Something, you know.
Yum, yum, eat them up. Yum, yum, eat them up.
But when you were a kid, that stuff was kind of freaky, you know?
Oh, that was totally freaky. I mean, you were just starting to hear about the cannibals and shrunken heads and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. And here's this guy, obviously.
Yum, yum, eat them up. So that, you know, that's the Wild Man of 1886 from the Bangor Daily News. So thanks to our friends at BangorDailyNews.com up in Bangor, Maine. I mean, I love these old stories, and this is pretty wild.
Yeah, I love them too. And it doesn't have to be anything more than it is, Kev. It's in typeface. It's recorded in its simplicity. And to me, it's just enough to show you that these things have been around for a long time, you know?
Yeah, and they weren't going for more hits on their YouTube site, you know, to get some more advertising dollars.
Yeah.
They were just reporting the real news.
Can you imagine people back then, like, opening up this single-sheet newspaper and eyeballing?
Hearing about this 10-foot tall, you know, wild man with 7-foot-long arms and covered in brown hair.
Yeah, I mean, it would make you think twice about walking out in the fields that
Holy
day.
cow.
You know?
And the place, you know, the whole place is so rural. Think about 1886. up in Moosehead Lake, Maine. I mean, geez, I haven't been to Moosehead Lake, but I've been up to some of these lakes in Maine. They're all pretty rural today in 2023.
Yeah, it's not a lot has changed.
No, not a lot's changed,
Which also brings us back to the fact of the 9.5 million acres in North America where these things could be anywhere at any point in time.
Yeah. 9.5 million, that sounds low.
Yeah, well, let's make it 10.5. I don't know. When I think of millions of square miles, that's just like...
Oh, you said acres, though. So.
Oh, no, square miles, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think you said acres.
I don't know. Maybe I did.
Maybe you didn't.
But, no, that's an excellent story, Kev. And, folks, if you're new to this podcast, I have a custom of dragging some stuff out of the closet once in a while. And I guarantee you that you have never heard an account like this in all of your days. And I'm going to go back through it with you and the rest of the audience right now. This story came to me by way of Brian Mahoney from Fargo, North Dakota. This is Brian's tale as it was conveyed to me. I had been long tired of seeing the TV shows with people banging logs on trees and never seeing anything. When I ran across your query and decided to take you where the action is. In 1967, my dad and 3 other men in the neighborhood took me and 4 other boys on a trip to Ontario to fish for muskies. We found ourselves landing at Perot Falls Airport, where we met up with a couple of float planes that ferried us up to a place near Ear Falls. My only memory was that we had rented a pretty big cabin for the week with plenty of room for all of us to rough it. Heck, we didn't care at the time if we slept in the woods. We were up in the sticks, landing on water in a seaplane, and we were going muskie fishing. The dads had hired a guide whose name was Lars. We had 3 boats for the group. The boats were pretty big, something like 18 or 20 feet, and they had plenty of power to get us around in a hurry. Several days into the trip, we had been into the fish hot and heavy every day, just as advertised. We were landing muskies in a range of 28 to 36 inches on a regular basis and having ourselves a ball. The fight of these fish pound for pound is outrageous. Most of the shoreline that we were fishing had forest coming right down to the water's edge. But periodically there was an area of bank with no trees that was visible along the shore. We had been fishing every day, facing the shore and pretty close to it for the most part. It must have been about 4 p.m. when we heard a loud and long roar coming from the woods. We all looked at each other and asked Lars, "What the hell is that?" He said that it sounded like a large grizzly bear. It was only 2 minutes after we heard the first roar that another one sounded off, coming from the opposite direction in the woods. There must be either 2 of them or one very fast runner. This is what he was thinking. Over the next 15 minutes or so, as we sat fishing the bank, we heard several more roars, and it seemed like they were being made back and forth by 2 different bears. At least that's what we thought at the time. Now, before I continue, I have to set you up visually for what was about to happen. We were sitting in 3 boats, spaced maybe 150 feet apart. All of these boats were about 100 feet from the shore, facing one of these slopes on the bank that I told you about before. The water we were fishing in was approximately 6 feet deep, and the bottom was covered with the grasses that these muskies hung around in. We were all looking at each other from boat to boat as we listened to these roars, which sounded like they were getting closer and closer to our position. I don't know why, but I felt like a fuse had been lit, and a bomb was about to explode. And explode it did. Suddenly, the woods directly in front of us erupted in what I can only describe as a lion fight. The volume and intensity of the roaring was so loud that it hurt my ears. I couldn't see what was making the noise yet. I looked at the other boats to my right, and Laws was already waving to start the motors. As we started the engines, we were now all motoring further away from the shoreline, but everyone was still looking back at the trees. The roars almost drowned out the sound of our engines at times. We switched into neutral, and all the boats were now about 300 feet from the shore, still facing the woods. It was so intense that I personally was trembling. I could now make out two large, dark figures engaging in an apparent battle for supremacy just inside of the tree line. The roaring was unrelenting as the struggle ensued within the trees. At one point, I almost felt as though I was going to faint. I really can't find the words to describe my emotions. Right at a time when I thought that things couldn't possibly get any worse, these two giant black beasts came tumbling out of the trees, rolling down the embankment, smacking and biting each other. Both of the beasts were now in the water, and every time one started to stand, the other one would slap it, and then they would grapple, smashing each other into the water again. Each time one bit the other, the screams of pain were even louder than when they had been apart. I remember that thinking that I wanted to stop watching and listening, but I couldn't. I could tell that the one beast was starting to get the better of the other. And finally, with one titanic blow, the creature's body buckled to the ground and it lay there unmoving. This victor, or the victor, stood leering over the other one, growling ever more intensely and pounding its chest in the moment. It reminded me of King Kong when he beat the dinosaur. I thought the downed beast was dead. It lay half in the water and half out, face down and not moving. Then the other beast turned to face us, and raising its head into the air, let out what sounded like a half roar and a half scream as it pumped its fists and flexed its upper body. It then turned to the victim and stood over it, roaring over and over again. A few moments later, it walked up the bank, roaring and screaming into the woods. Everyone in the boats was shell-shocked, and our mouths hung open. Some of the guys were holding their heads like they were losing their minds, and none of us could speak. I saw the beast that was lying in the water, lift its arm and drop it as though it was its last gasp. We motored away and headed back to the lodge for the evening. Now, I won't get into all of the conversation and whatnot that went on that night because there's so much more to tell you about these beasts. I had never heard a grizzly bear in my life. And when Laws said the roars had sounded like a big grizzly, something had said to me that it wasn't true. Up until that point, I had never heard anything living make a sound that loud. It was as intense as a diesel train's whistle. Had it been closer, it may have broken our eardrums. And when they were fighting in front of us, some of the other guys actually had their hands to their ears. The oars that were laying on the aluminum boat seats were vibrating loudly. Another thing was the fight itself. At no time during the fight did they hit each other with a closed fist. They were slapping each other open-handed, grappling and biting. It seemed to me that the biting was used to get an advantage during what appeared to be a wrestling match. The fight had been so intense that I couldn't understand how either of them could withstand another second before one of them had dropped. Laws went back to the scene the next day, and the one in the water was gone. So maybe it had survived, but we'll never know. When they were slapping and thrashing each other around in the water, the waves which they were creating were rocking our boat far off the shore. They were incredibly large, and when their mouths were open and roaring, in particular the one that in the end was looking at us while roaring, I could see huge white teeth. It looked like a bowling ball could fit in the mouth with no problem. The two of them had to be in excess of 10 feet tall and maybe 2,000 pounds. When they were slamming each other against the ground, I could feel the reverberations out on the water, and you could hear the hit. This had to be some type of animalistic fight for territory or domination of the females. It was as if they were calling each other to the duel, and neither was going to back down. In my opinion, these are vicious and bloodthirsty wild beasts that are not to be trifled with. But there are people walking around in the woods with no guns who must be out of their minds, thinking they're going to visit Mr. Happy of the forest. Unbelievable. One of these monsters could easily take a full-grown man and throw him into orbit. How's that? This type of physical strength and force is something that we know nothing about and quite possibly never will. And I'll tell you something, folks. I'd have to say that having heard this testimony, it may be very well have taken the number one spot at the time. Brian blew me right out of the box when I sat there listening to him, and this testimony is just absolutely out of this world. What do you make of that, Kev?
That is something else. So this is like fishing party in the late 60s, right? Up in Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, they went in there in float plane.
Yeah.
And, they were out there, man.
And the hairy man, I mean, we have heard before, not necessarily during a fight, but, some of those recordings of the roar, to me, they do sound like a diesel train horn. And that's what they compared it to as well, right?
And really, if you're close enough, to them, who knows what this thing would sound like or do to you.
Yeah, but, something that's 2,000 pounds and has a mouth big enough to fit a bowling ball in can make some noise.
Yeah.
Little hippo hurricane holler.
Yeah, that's right, the hurricane hippo.
Well, we should have warned everyone to cover their ears.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
But yeah, that is I can't even imagine in the description of the oars vibrating while they're sitting there in these aluminum boats.
Yeah, just
wow.
Slapping, biting, and grappling. Like a wrestling match.
Yeah, I could definitely see the biting. Why not?
Yeah. Well, look, man, I don't know what these things are capable of withstanding. Yeah. But if you think of a 10-foot tall beast laying into, we know these things can twist tree limbs on a live tree.
Yeah.
Who knows what kind of power they can bring to the table as far as an open hand slap to a head. If it hit me or you, our head would probably pop like a pumpkin.
Yeah, it's a little hockey fight.
Boy, oh boy. Yeah, so that's it, man. Freaking brutal.
That is fantastic, Bill. What an account.
Yeah. And I like to bring them out. You know, I go back and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be told time and time again to just keep your mind fixed. You know, on.
I like the description too of like they thought it was like two lions having a fight before they saw it, right? Which you can imagine two lions having a fight would be like that, right? Kind of swatting one another and wrestling and getting a bite on one another's necks.
Yeah, just this vicious animal struggle.
Yeah.
You know, and they're looking to hurt each other. This isn't for fun,
no doubt about it. One of them is going to die.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah.
So,
or at least be left for dead.
Yeah, well, apparently they said, or he said, the one that was left laying on the bank in the water raised its arm at one time like it was its last gasp, you know. But maybe it recovered. How else would it get out of there unless the other thing came back and dragged it into the woods?
Yeah, or another one, you know, came back and dragged it into the woods. Right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the one that beat the crap out of it.
Right, just to retrieve it, you know.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, Kev, because I've said time and time again that these things bury their dead.
Yeah.
And if that was the case, if there was more than one of them, which there has to be, these two probably, there were others that were aware of what was going to go down. And when that roar...
Now, why do you think, I know you said that before, why do you think they bury their dead? Just because there aren't any bodies?
Well, I think that would be the prelude to not finding a lot of bodies, like dead bodies laying around in the woods.
Okay.
I think the only way you're going to find one is if you happen to dig in an area where one was buried, or perhaps in the case of, what was that fella's name? You know, the fella that found, came up behind that truck on the interstate, the creature was laying on the side of the road?
Yeah.
I can't, any other time
I can't think of his name. Yeah.
The Spanish couple.
Yeah.
And, anyways, you know, I think some of these things, I'm sure some of these things have been found. But we just they're hustled away, you know, like a UFO or anything else that they just don't want to talk about, you know.
Well, I was going to say, you know, you're saying that they bury the dead because there's no bodies, and you know me, I'm always the Occam's razor guy, you know, looking for the most obvious explanation, and I was thinking like aliens taking their bodies back to the spaceship would be the most obvious. Okay, maybe obvious to me is not a good example.
Hey, look, here comes some aliens picking up the Bigfoot. Let's get out of here.
Picking up the Bigfoot. What's that spaceship doing here? They're picking up the dead Bigfoot. Where do you think the bodies go?
They're taking them to the landfill.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's crazy stuff, though, man. And, you know, I don't know what you think about that, but that is like out-of-the-box nuts.
Well, I mean, it's you got to figure that they do fight with one another.
Every animal species has tussles.
Yeah, especially the males.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and we see the deer, the bucks fight to the death. They will kill each other.
Bears too, grizzlies too.
Yeah, so it doesn't faze me in the least that these things from time to time would engage in some type of warfare.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of part of the fall of the planet that everything was supposed to be peaceable from the get-go, but then the flip occurred, you know?
Yep.
So that's it.
Yeah, by the way, speaking of UFOs and that, well, first off, great account. Now, I don't know if the comet will be gone by the time this podcast airs, but we're going to have to talk about it. You see the news about this green-hued comet that's coming along this week.
Yeah, is it here yet? Because I've had cloud cover for days.
It's not here yet, I don't think, but it's, of course it's stormy and rainy here as well. But I think they're saying that, I think I read that February 4th is going to be the best day to see it in the Northern Hemisphere.
Okay.
So that's still 2 weeks away. Yeah. So, but again, I don't know when this one's going to air. It might be right around there, February 4th. But we got to talk about that if we're both fortunate enough to see it.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking, man.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, we'll talk about it. I hope I can see it because I love that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that's positive for seeing this is that it's going to be a new moon coming up here, so no moon in the sky.
Yeah, it's going to be dark.
Dark.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. So let's see what happens. We'll hope for the best,
Yeah, man. All right, well, we got some great listener mail this week, Bill.
Okay.
I think it's time for that.
Yeah, let's lay it on, my brother.
All right, so the first email comes in from Rick in the Big Thicket in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he says, Dear WJ and KJ, love the podcast and the banter between you guys. So which one of you was raised by the Bigfoot? He says, I digress. After listening to one of your reports about WildMan down here in Texas, my buddy and I went out to the bridge in the evening.
What bridge?
And he said, the WildMan Bridge down there. Yeah, and he says, in fairness, we didn't hang around till midnight, and we didn't flash our headlights to draw the demon out, but no sign of him.
Uh-huh.
But as a God-fearing Christian, I think that's a great thing that there was no sign of him.
Yeah, he knew not to mess around with you.
He says, I have no desire to stare into the red glowing eyes of a Satan-like horned beast.
Yeah, I'm with you, brother.
Well said, Rick.
Yeah.
He says, keep up the good work, Rick.
Yeah. See, I don't know why.
Man.
If you ask for trouble, it's coming, brother.
Oh, I know.
And it may not be coming today, but it's coming. So
no, and I got to go back and look at that one, but I think that was the thing. Like, if you went there at midnight certain days and you flash your headlights on one side of the bridge, then you see the WildMan. So Rick's making reference to that. Like, ooh.
See, in other words, Kev, they're entering into like a formula. They're following and basically creating an invitation with the belief that
they're conjuring this
that's right.
beast up.
That's right. It's like an incantation. The flashing, the time, the belief. It's an open invitation to bring evil in. So Rick is right about that. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see the red eyes. I don't want freaking WildMan to show up.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Don't forget the goat horns.
Yeah. Oh,
Bill.
please, WildMan. Please, please, please come. Jerk. Wow.
Careful what you wish for. All right, our next email comes from a long way away. From Andre from Qatar.
Wow.
Yeah, he says, Hi, WJ and KJ. Yes, there are some of us in Qatar that listen to Bigfoot podcasts.
Ooh.
But please don't say my family name on the podcast.
Yeah.
Hope that you gentlemen enjoyed the World Cup. We did our best to host a good one. Mm-hmm. We don't have any cryptids over here, but maybe that's just because alcohol is illegal. And Andre says, anyway, thanks for putting a smile on my face every time I listen. Best regards, Andre.
Kev, it's interesting. You and I both know that on our host site, we can see where people are downloading our show.
Right, not by name, but we can see how many people in Qatar.
That's right.
Qatar, or however you pronounce it, are downloading the podcast. And they're out there. I mean, it's virtually everywhere.
Yeah, it's, folks, it is the craziest thing to be doing this podcast and to see the statistics of where people are downloading. I mean, Kev, there are places in that stat sheet I've never heard of.
Oh, I know.
I don't even know what these places are. Are they countries? Are they county? I don't even know what they are. It's bizarre, and there are people out there listening to.
They're all listening. They're looking for the hairy man. Maybe a dog man or a rougarou, too. And maybe just a black-eyed child.
Come on in. Want some cookies? Why don't you sit over there?
I just want to use your phone.
While I load my over-under, why don't the two of you just sit right over there? I'll be right back.
All right, and our last email comes in, again from overseas, from Donal. No D on the end. Donal from Cork, Ireland. He says, "Hi, boys. Greetings from your ancestral land, or at least one of the ancestral lands." He says, "I love your brotherly chit-chat. You can definitely tell that other than the accounts, you are very much unscripted and unbounded." That's for sure, Donald. Although we don't have the hairy man over here, as far as I know.
You got hairy women.
We do have. No. He said, there you go. See, that's the unbounded thing he was referring to. That's my brother, Donald.
Listen.
No hairy women over here.
Yeah, it's nothing like a woman.
He says, although we don't have the hairy man here, as far as I know, we do have an abundance of legends, sprites, and of course, leprechauns. Can you give the Emerald Isle some love in future broadcasts?
What did he say his name was? Donut?
No, it's Donal. Donal is an Irish name. Donal. And by the way, Donal, I have been to Cork, Ireland, probably 6 or 7 times. Very cool city. Yeah.
Do they sell
cool
cork there, or what do they do over there, Cork?
They don't sell any cork. That is the city that I think the Titanic was setting sail to, if I'm not mistaken. Or at least they rescued people set out from Cork, Ireland to rescue people from the White Star Lines.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a tragedy, boy.
Oh, man. I was looking that up the other day, Bill. When do you think that was, off the top of your head?
1914.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It was 1914.
When was the Statue of Liberty brought to New York Harbor?
1886.
1889.
Oh, that was close.
Close, but no cigar.
But I was thinking 1920s or so for the Titanic. But you're right, 1914.
Yeah. It was a different world back then, man. And, those people didn't know what they were in store for.
No way. Yeah.
Just total tragedy.
Crazy.
But
and by the way, I'm a sailboat racer, Bill. And for our listeners out there, for you, I haven't told you about this. You got to tune in on the YouTube channel each day and check out, they call it now the Ocean Race, which is the round-the-world race that these crazy guys and gals do. Used to be called the Whitbread. It was sponsored by Whitbread round the world. Now it's just called the Ocean Race. And they set sail out of Europe, I think about 5 or 6 days ago. So every day they do an update. And you see these guys sailing along in these crazy seas. And now they're doing like 30 or 40 knots in these hydrofoiling sloops.
Boy, oh boy.
Unbelievable.
Man.
Yeah, you got to check out the footage.
Who helps these people out there if they go down?
God.
Really? There's no big chase boats. Well, what could keep up that speed?
Nobody out there. Yeah.
Wow.
No. I mean, they could help one another.
Yeah.
Right? In theory. I mean, they certainly would try to, but I mean, if they're on like the pretty reasonable part of the trip now. Like they just finished the first leg, which ended in Cape Verde off the west coast of Africa.
Okay.
But, after this, I think they go on the longest leg, which is some crazy distance where they keep sailing south. They go around the tip of Africa and then roar along close to Antarctica, like the shortest way around the world, and end up, I don't know, in like Fiji or something. I don't even know where, but it's like crazy.
So they go around Cape Horn?
That they sail. Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
But they stay in, I think they call it the Roaring 30s.
Yeah.
Like it's 30 degrees north of the South Pole. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's icebergs, and the wind just howls. And, oh, man. Mm-hmm. You got to check it out. Check it out. Anyway, I digress. Mm-hmm. Check out the Ocean Race on YouTube. They're not sponsoring us, but it's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up, Kev, because I'd be interested in seeing.
Subscribe.
I'm surprised they don't give us any clips of that on television.
That is television. Watch it on YouTube.
I'm just saying, Kev, major...
Wide world of sports is gone.
Yeah, I know, man. We used to get everything.
I know in 2 years, it's all going to be on YouTube and stuff.
Unbelievable.
But I know, it's a big change.
Yep.
But thanks. This is a great episode, Bill. Good podcast. The WildMan of the 1880s in Maine. And then, man, that fight account is unbelievable.
Yeah, and I love that old stuff, those old clips. Newspaper articles, it really brings to the table what it is that we're talking about here. This is not some
100%
wives' tales, some fables, some imaginative creature. This is the real deal, folks, and they're out there.
It's not a leprechaun?
No, it's not. They don't wear a little buckled shoe and a weird little hat. What was that guy's name again? Donut?
Donald. Don't pick on Donut.
I'm picking on him.
Gee, see, whoever wrote in and said the Unbounded. Was that you, Donald? That's what you get for bringing up Unbounded. You set my brother off.
Well, anyways, folks, if you should find yourself walking around the woods in northern Maine, or perhaps you're over the line like the Frenchman was, you better remember one thing. Always carry more gun than you think you're gonna need. Sleep tight.